Alabama began using nitrogen gas earlier this year to carry out some executions. The method involves placing a respirator gas mask over the face to replace breathable air with pure nitrogen gas, causing death by lack of oxygen. UN experts expressed alarm at an imminent execution in the United States using nitrogen hypoxia and said that this method may amount to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, or even torture. Call for an urgent ban on execution by nitrogen asphyxiation, which is clearly prohibited under international law, the expert said, reminding the United States of its international obligations as a party to both the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. The experts also expressed concern that defendants challenging their execution method on the basis that it may constitute inhumane or degrading treatment in the United States of America needed to prove there is an alternative method of execution available. The prohibition on torture or too cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment is absolute, never acceptable, and not dependent on alternatives. The experts also underlined their grave concern that other U.S. states were taking steps to use nitrogen gas inhalation as a method of execution. This case further echoes concern over the lack of effective legal assistance and accommodations to guarantee fair trial and due process in criminal cases against persons with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities. Alabama puts Demetrius Terrence Frazier to death for a 1991 murder in the nation's fourth execution using nitrogen gas. Demetrius Terrence Frazier was born in Michigan on October 29, 1972. Frazier was raised by his mother, who was a single mother and was struggling to raise her children. During his childhood, Demetrius Terrence Frazier would often sneak out of his house to commit petty offenses. Frazier, as a juvenile, was dealt with by the law for carrying concealed weapons and also violated his probation for both carrying concealed weapons and breaking and entering. At the age of 19 years old, Demetrius Terrence Frazier had committed 2 murders, in Michigan and Alabama. In Birmingham, Alabama on November 27, 1991, Frazier saw an apartment in the area while walking around the streets, when Frazier noticed that the apartment itself had a light on, and therefore formulated an intention to commit robbery. Frazier, by removing the screen from the window, entered through the window. He searched around the apartment and found some money, amounting to $5 or $10 in cash. While looking for more things to steal, he then went to another room, where he found 40-year-old Pauline Starks Brown sleeping in her bedroom. Pauline Starks Brown was waken up by Frazier demanded more money, and Pauline gave him $80 out of her purse. Frazier then threatened Pauline with a gun, and forced her to have sexual intercourse with him. Pauline begged for her life, but Frazier refused to spare her life and fired a shot in the back of her head and left the apartment before leaving Demetrius Terrence Frazier. Check if anyone had heard the gunshot. Realizing the silence, he found that Brown had died. Demetrius Terrence Frazier searched the apartment for more money, ate some food, and left the apartment, and he also disposed of the gun to try and get rid of evidence. In Detroit, Michigan, on March 8, 1992, Demetrius Terrence Frazier murdered a young girl in midst of a rape attempt. The same day, Frazier confined a 14-year-old runaway girl, Crystal Kendrick, inside an abandoned house, and during the attempt to rape Crystal Kendrick, Frazier shot Kendrick to death while the 14-year-old child tried to flee from the house. In Michigan, on July 9, 1992, Demetrius Terrence Frazier was charged with first-degree murder for the fatal shooting of Crystal Kendrick. He was also charged with raping 8 other women. On April 8, 1993, a Michigan trial court found Frazier guilty of felony murder and felony firearms possession in the case of Crystal Kendrick's death. Frazier was sentenced to double terms of life imprisonment for both counts. Frazier was indicted by a Jefferson County jury in Alabama on November 1993 on charges of capital murder for the death of Pauline Brown. Unlike Michigan, which was a non-death penalty state, the death penalty was legalized in Alabama as a potential punishment for capital murder. Frazier was found guilty on June 5, 1996, of one count of capital murder under the circumstances of robbery and one lesser charge of murder in the course of rape. On June 7, 1996, the jury recommended the death penalty by a vote of 10-2 for the charge of capital murder. Demetrius Frasier served his life sentence at the Alger Maximum Correctional Facility from 1993 to 2011, under the supervision of the Michigan Department of Corrections. He was eventually transferred to the Hallman Correctional Facility in Alabama, where he was held on death row since 2011. Frazier appealed against his death sentence for the murder of Pauline Brown in Alabama. On January 10, 1999, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed Frazier's appeal against his death sentence. On October 19, 2024, a request for Frazier's death warrant to be issued was made, and on January 7, 2025, Alabama Governor K.I.V. scheduled Demetrius Frazier's execution date as February 6, 2025. Following an order from the Alabama Supreme Court authorizing the governor to set the date. Alabama became the first state to conduct nitrogen gas executions, putting 3 people to death last year with the method. It involves placing a respirator gas mask over the person's face to replace breathable air with pure nitrogen gas, causing death by lack of oxygen. Frazier, like the first 3 people to be executed by the method, shook or quivered on the gurney, although to a lesser degree than the others. On February 6, 2025, Demetrius Terrence Frazier was strapped to a gurney with a blue-rimmed gas mask covering his entire face. The execution began at about 6:10 p.m. after a corrections officer did a final check of the mask. Frazier moved his outstretched palms in a swirling circular movement for the first minute or two. At 6:12 p.m., he stopped circling his hands. He appeared to grimace, quiver on the gurney and take a gasping breath. A minute later, he raised both legs several inches off the gurney and then lowered them. In his final statement, Frazier apologized to the surviving friends and family members of Brown, and in turn, the African American community, stating that the death of Brown should not have happened. Frazier also suggested that the media should contact a former detective from Michigan, claiming he made a false confession about the murder of Crystal Kendrick. His last 2 words were, "Let's go." Frazier's final meal consisted of a meal from Taco Bell, a beefy 5-layer burrito, a chicken chalupa supreme, beef crunchy tacos, chips and dip, and a Mountain Dew. Frazier also received a final visit from his mother, sister, and counsel before the death sentence was carried out. Frazier was the 4th condemned inmate in Alabama to undergo a nitrogen gas execution since 2024. Frazier was also the first person executed in Alabama in 2025, as well as the 3rd execution to happen in the U.S. that same year. Thank you for watching Death Row.